All right, we are going for a as close to 1 second zest as we can get. As close to 1 second as possible. That's pretty good. Pretty good. Yo guys, what is up? Moxsy on Path of Exile 2 video, and today we're going over our updated Crit Ice Shot Deadeye build. We've made some honestly pretty minor adjustments to the last build video, but we've like almost doubled our DPS, which is insane. So we're doing some new tech that I can't wait to show off to you guys. Hope you enjoy the full build guide and breakdown. Let's get right into it. Real quick, I do want to mention that this is definitely a very endgame focused build guide. I get questions if like, hey, you're gonna make a budget build or anything like that. I have uploaded my entire progression on my Deadeye, literally from day one, posting build updates like every few days. So I will have links in the description if you're looking for a more budget version of this build, because now we're really like min-maxing our damage for endgame to just be blasting as much as possible. So if you are looking for any of that earlier stuff and like starting setups, we'll have that linked. This is going to be really focused on pushing our damage to the maximum at endgame. So let's start by going over our gem setup. We've got Orb of Storms. Orb of Storms is used to start the cascade of like crazy lightning ball lightnings that we're going to be using. So we put this down with Font of Mana to give us mana regen and Font of Rage to give us attack damage. And when we put this thing down, our damage will just skyrocket as long as we're like attacking near it. As you can see, like my ice shot's getting up to like 100 and we just passed 2,000 or 200k damage on our ice shot. I actually didn't even know that we were that high. So that's pretty crazy. But Orb of Storms is going to be giving us Font of Mana, Chain, and Font of Rage. We're using this to initiate kind of all of our procs. Now, for just general mapping, I use Blink. For specifically doing pinnacle bosses, I use Conductivity to lower lightning res. I do want to better explain the Blink setup that we're using. Right now we're using Blink in our weapon swap. So for example, we're going to be using all of our build and all of our attacks with our ice shot, and all of those things are set to weapon 1, which is our bow. And then our weapon swap with this build is going to be any wand. It doesn't really matter. You just want cast speed on your wand. I didn't like buy this. It was just in my inventory. Just something with some cast speed. And then you want to use the Jingling Crest Shield, the Crest of Ardura, mainly because this provides us with cooldown recovery rate, which is going to impact our blink. And on our blink, we're going to want to make sure that this is put to weapon number 2. We don't have enough spirit to use blink and our other things. So we're not enabling, like, for example, Herald Device when we're blinking, because we don't care about that when we're blinking. We just want our blink to go off, and then we're going to go back to shooting. And so, for example, blink is set to only weapon 2. And then we've got Raise Shield. And what we're doing with Raise Shield is Raise Shield is a skill. To raise our shield, we're obviously going to have to swap to our thing. So instead of having to manually swap our weapons, and like the issue with that is like, oh, sometimes it can be annoying to keep track of what weapon you're at. Instead of having to manually swap weapons, I'm using Raise Shield in my middle mouse. So when I click middle mouse, I pull out my shield, but I can click that at the exact same time that I am hitting my dodge button. So when we roll, when you have blink on, whatever your roll button is gets replaced by blink. So we can just tap our shield and then blink, and then with the shield on, we get more cooldown so that we can blink around. A little bit of a very cheap Temporalis setup so that we can get around faster. And I really like this for, like, you know, just clearing maps faster and like getting to where you need to be for breach. We don't really need Tornado Shot or Conductivity for mapping, so that's why we're using blink. We're putting it in a second hand so that we can have enough spirit to use blink, because obviously this costs a lot of spirit, otherwise we wouldn't be able to use it normally. So now we get back to our ice shot. For ice shot, still using the same gems. The least important gem is heft. I get asked like, which one would you chop off if you don't have a full link? Get rid of heft. But on our main links, we're using primal armament, martial tempo, ambush, fork, and heft. We have upgraded our crit chance a bunch, so I'm now sitting at 40% crit chance, which is feeling really, really great. And obviously with the ambush support, supported skills have 100% more crit chance against enemies that are full life. This is multiplicative 100%. So we are now sitting an 80% chance whenever we're shooting at enemies at full life to deal 646% more damage to them, which is crazy. So that's part of the reason why the build is feeling even better than it was before. My old crit chance was like 33%, so we raised that up a bunch. We'll talk about how we did that. Next up, we get to Lightning Rod. For mapping, we're using Close Combat on our Lightning Rod, Scatter Shot, Concentrated Effect, Conduction, and Lightning Pen. For bossing, I swap Primal Armament for Close Combat, and I swap Heft for Lightning Pen when we're actually pinnacle bossing. We don't need the Lightning Pen because we're going to be using Conductivity, which is going to lower lightning resistances, so that Lightning Pen gets swapped out. And I'm honestly swapping out Conduction now on pinnacle bosses for Close Combat so that we get this more attack damage when we're close to enemies. This is not something you need to do if you don't have enough lightning damage, but we have so much lightning damage now on the build that I don't actually need Conduction to proc our chance to shock. We're shocking like crazy. So if you're not procking your cast on shock like crazy, you still use Conduction. And if you have no issues, you can use Close Combat. Try it out. If it works for you, that's great. It's another 25% more damage for the build, which is awesome. But yeah, definitely not needed. Then for our Herald of Thunder and Herald of Ice, I keep getting asked what I would put in the 5 links for this, so we'll go over that as well. I'm not 5 linking mine just because I don't think it's necessary. I think they do a F ton of damage and do everything that we need to do on a 4 link, and there's only really quality of life to be gained with 5 linking it, so we'll talk about that in a second. But on our Herald of Thunder, we're using Ice Bite, Lightning Mastery, Glaciation, and Cold Infusion. And our Herald of Ice, we've got Innervate, Lightning Infusion, Long Shot, and Magnified Effect. Just to kind of go over some of my stats on my Herald of Thunder, it's dealing 7,000 on the top end of lightning damage and 3,000 on the low end of its cold damage. And my Herald of Herald of Ice is doing 11k lightning damage and 2,300 cold. Basically, what this allows us to do is our Herald of Ice is going to be shocking things and giving us Innervate, and our Herald of Thunder is going to be proccing all of this cold damage for us. My cold damage is actually a little bit low. I think I was not wearing my cold ring. If we look at Herald of Thunder now we're at over 4k cold damage. But yeah, getting some extra cold damage on the build helps with your Herald of Thunder, proccing Herald of Ice, which is really nice. For Wind Dancer, we're using Cannibalism, Blind, and Maim. Cast on Shock. This is something I really want to stress because it's actually the #1 mistake I see people making on this build is they're using high-level spells in Cast on Shock. We are casting Ball Lightning. We're casting Eye of Winter, but these are not actually dealing any damage for us. They do no damage, and if you increase the levels of them, they're only going to cost more mana, which will lead you to have more mana issues. So you do not want to put any sort of high level ball of anything in here. You want them as low level as possible because their level does not give you more damage. And then with that, we've got Inspiration support and Impetus. If you're using the Thieves Torment, you could put on the other energy thing for Inspiration, but I find Inspiration to be pretty nice. Just get that little less cost. And then lastly, we're using Grim Feast with Clarity, a little bit more mana regen, and Grim Feast has tons of survivability. We have upped the energy shield on the build a bit, so now we're at sitting at 1,000 energy shield, which is great. For final links on Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder, if you did want to do this, once again, I don't think it's necessary, but on Herald of Ice, we would use Cold Mastery to get +1 levels of cold skills for some extra damage on this. And then for Herald of Thunder, I think the best one would be Cold Penetration. Obviously, if we're dealing more cold damage, we have more chance to freeze with Herald of Thunder for more procs of our Herald of Ice. So it would be Cold Pen on Herald of Thunder and Cold Mastery on Herald of Ice if you do want to 6-link these. For the skill tree, nothing really is changing here. We are going to talk about a small setup change that I do specifically delete pinnacle bosses, but skill tree is widely the same. One thing that I get asked a bunch about the build is hey, how do you have so much damage? I've copied your setup and I'm not getting the same amount of damage. One of the big things that really is impactful for this build is emeralds. I don't have any like crazy emeralds. I'll show you the best one that I do own is this like evasion, crit chance, crit damage bonus for our quiver. But just to give you an idea of how to scale your damage, like there's so many things that are factoring in there. Let's swap these back. Right now, our ice shot's at like 169,000 damage. And if I take this off, this jewel alone is like 14,000 damage for me currently. And so the more you invest into the build, the more you're going to be able to scale your damage. But there's not like one single piece of gear that is increasing my damage by a ton. It's not like there's one thing that's bringing me from like 100k to 169k. All of the like little things, like this jewel doesn't even have quiver effect on it. It's just damage with bows, increased damage, attack damage, and some lightning damage. And this alone is like 11k damage for me. Rings is a huge place to find damage. This is a new pickup. We'll talk about that when we get to gear. But I'm at 169k. If I take this off, I'm losing about 18k damage just off of this ring alone. This one's losing me like 15k damage. And so, you know, all the little pieces of your gear really add up to scale your damage up a ton. But for the skill tree, finding those jewels helps a ton. And then let's talk about the small change that you can make for pinnacle bosses. This is if you just want to go all out. The skill tree does not need to change for pinnacle bosses, but there's a few changes that we can do for them. I find that pinnacle bosses don't get to hit us anymore or even attack, so we can kill them so fast. So I honestly just unspec these points from Spectral Reward real quick, and I unspec these points from Sniper, because Sniper is all about, you know, crit chance when we're far away. We're going to be close to enemies. This gives us 6 points to spend on the build, which we spend here into Cooked to give us 50% more crit damage during any flask effect. So you just click a mana flask during a boss fight, you get 50% increased crit damage. And then we also go for these nodes here for stand and deliver. This gives us 40% crit damage against enemies within 2 meters, and projectiles deal increased damage with hits against enemies within 2 meters. Putting on this and this is just a giga amount of damage for the build. But, you know, not something you need to do. You're definitely going to be a little bit squishier. As you see, I lost like just from losing that spectral bonuses, we're losing like 400%, 400 energy shield, which obviously is not ideal. But once again, I have yet to die to like a pinnacle boss because we kill them so fast. So that is like a little change that you can do if you're really trying to cook up some big damage. So now let's talk about my gear. This is where the largest changes have come in. As you know, our last video, we were doing like 11 million damage, and now we've almost doubled that. And so how the hell did we do that? Because my bow is still the exact same and my quiver is the exact same. And I've made some few adjustments and improvements, but one of the questions that I get asked a lot with this build for players that are like have all of their gear is like, hey, you know, what's the next step? Like, what's the next big thing to upgrade? And if you really want to juice your damage, the next big upgrade is this thing. This is the Melting Maelstrom Ultimate Mana Flask, and this is a game changer for this build. I bought this for 14 divines. We do not care about what the roll is. You just want one of these, so you can buy the cheapest one possible. And the big thing that this does for the build is this line right here that we just changed when I clicked on it, but recover all mana when used. This is what we care about, because with this build, we're sending out 18 kajillion ball lightnings and Eye of Winters all at the same time, and it's impossible to keep up with our mana drain on this build without putting on a Thieves' Torment ring. So the Thieves' Torment was our solution to bossing, and because we put on a Thieves' Torment, a bunch of terrible things happen. We lose all of our resistances and we lose our rings. And so, like, you know, I've put on the Thieves' Torment, for example, like my Ice Shot goes to like 116k. Not that we're bossing with Ice Shot, but to show you the damage difference. And then if I put on, you know, something like this, it goes back up to like 144k. And so the Thieves' Torment makes us lose damage, but it was kind of the only option to solve bossing with this build. And that is all solved now by the Melting Maelstrom Ultimate Flask, because now we can recover all mana when used. So, you know, if you're using a normal mana flask, the mana upkeep of a normal mana flask could just never keep up with the mana drain. However, with this thing, we can just spam this, and we get all of our mana back instantly. It recovers all of our mana when used, and then we get to keep all of our rings, which keeps all of our damage, all of our survivability, and so then we get a ton of more boss damage because we're not using the Thieves' Torment, and we get to keep all of our resistances and survivability. Now, this ring does have one, or this Flask does have one downside, and that it deals 25% of our current mana as chaos damage to you when the effect ends. And I was worried that this was going to kill us, and I just kind of want to chug a bunch of these to show you what it does. So there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5, there's 6, there's 7. That's all of our charges. And now it's going to start dealing damage to us. And as you can see, like, the damage that it does is incredibly manageable. Like, we're going to lose a little bit of health and a little bit of energy shield, but for the ability to keep all of our reses and, you know, all of our max life and all of that, I think that's fine. That was all of it. And, you know, if we have some more chaos res, it's going to hurt us less. I currently only have 49 with those 2 rings on, but it's like not an issue. It really is a non-issue, the amount of damage this does. It's just a huge build enabler because we get to keep our rings on, and then we get to get, for example, because of this, I got to get this ring that does a bunch of cold damage, lightning, increased lightning damage for our bossing with a bunch of crazy resists on it, and then we can get some crazy rings for this. And the other thing that we can do is, if we're going to use crazy rings and we don't need to use Thieves' Torment, we can actually use Ingenuity. Ingenuity is, in my opinion, overkill. It's not needed at all, but it does increase our damage, because now the whole reason to not use Ingenuity with this build, the entire reason, was because when we're bossing, we would just be putting on a Thieves' Torment, and a Thieves' Torment just ruins all of our rings. But if we're not ruining our rings, then for bossing specifically, we could put on an Ingenuity, and then we get even more damage out. So, like, you know, if I put on this Ingenuity, I'm gonna get a bunch of extra damage, which is very nice. But, like, once again, it's really not that needed. For example, if we look at, like, my Ice Shot damage is at like 157k. With the Headhunter, it's 144k. So it is, you know, more damage if we put on an Ingenuity. Obviously, if this was like a 90% Ingenuity, it'd be even more. I bought this for 14 divines, so also, like, you know, not like a crazy percentage, but it is more damage for our boss DPS, because we don't need to use a Thieves' Torment if we're using this Melting Maelstrom Flask. This Melting Maelstrom is more expensive than a Thieves' Torment, so, you know, this is like a higher end version, but basically this allows us to not use this ring anymore, which is really awesome, because this was a huge kind of annoyance for the build. And then we get to talk about the rest of our gear. So, by the way, I'm still using Headhunter like 99% of the time. I think Headhunter, if you're going to buy one of these belts, is absolutely better than Ingenuity for this build, because Headhunter gives us the survivability, the AoE clear, the movement speed that we want in maps. Ingenuity is kind of just like a cherry on top for some extra boss DPS if you want it, because we can use the Melting Maelstrom. But these are all like hyper endgame upgrades. Now let's get gear specifics. So my bow is a 354 DPS bow, still using the same one. Now that we have Path of Building, I can check, and this bow with 350 DPS with a high roll of crit damage bonus is equivalent damage for this build to a 450 DPS bow without crit damage bonus. So I was going to buy a 100 damage bow, or 100 damage bow upgrade, and I found that it just wasn't worth technically for me, because we've got so much crit damage on this. So I'm still using the same bow, haven't upgraded, but we're getting a ton of crit chance and crit damage. And the big thing on our bow that we're changing with this build, as I made an update on, is we're now going to be socketing crit runes on our bow. Crit runes are better than elemental runes. They're better than physical runes. They're better than anything else that we could put on our bow. It's so much damage. It's why I'm now sitting at like 646 crit damage multiplier for the build, is because my bow has a bunch of crit damage bonus on it, which is really nice. For the rest of the gear, I did swap out my like old ring that I had. This one's got a ton of added damage and increased damage. This is giving us a bunch of extra damage and a ton of LE res. I swap out a few of these different like breach rings, depending on if I'm wanting like extra rarity for maps or whatnot. This is the one I've got on right now with some added cold, max life, rarity, dex, and cold res. On my helmet, still the same one. I would love to get a helmet with crit chance. It was pretty expensive to get a good helmet with crit chance, so I went and got a new solar amulet with crit chance. This cost me 140 exalts, so less than a divine, I think, right now. And it's got crit chance, crit damage, and max life, and spirit, and cold res. So this was pretty cheap to pick up. I did want plus levels of projectiles. All the people that were selling plus levels of projectiles amulets were not responding to my trade request, so I just bought this one for cheap instead. And because I'm losing reses on my amulet, I went and picked up some extra reses on my ring. And then for my quiver, still got crit chance, added cold, increased damage with bow skills, projectile speed, crit chance, crit damage. All of these are exactly what you want on your quiver. It doesn't need to be cold. It could be added fizz. It could be added cold. It could be added lightning. But you want damage with bow skills, projectile speed, crit chance, crit damage, and a visceral quiver, which comes with an implicit crit chance. That is like the god roll for our quiver. And then for like the perfect mirror tier quiver for us would probably have plus levels of projectiles instead of life per enemy killed or attack speed or mana on kill. Just not something that I quite have. Because this ring has so much lightning res, I swapped out my boots to pick up some extra chaos res. And I upgraded from a 30% movement speed boot to a 35% movement speed boot. So we are zooming in maps with 35% movement speed, our blink, and everything else. And then still rocking the Hand of Wisdom in action. Then the last thing I wanted to mention with a bit of our build update is like a question that I get asked a ton, which is which do you prefer, Ice Shot versus Lightning Arrow? And I think I've finally come to a conclusion on which I like more. Because for the longest time, I was like, oh, they're both good. Can't really go wrong. They're easy to swap between. You know, try them out and see which one you like more. I finally decided which one I like more personally, and that is personally Ice Shot. I think both skills are incredible, but the big issue, not saying that you couldn't fix this, but just the general issue that I was encountering with Lightning Arrow has to do with this modifier. Monsters have percentage increased ailment threshold. Maybe you've encountered it yourself, but this mod was bricking my Lightning Arrow build where, you know, if enemies had a ton of ailment threshold, I wasn't able to freeze, and then if I wasn't able to freeze, I wasn't able to clear quickly, and it felt really bad having to constantly, you know, check my maps to see if it was a map that I could run. Ice Shot does so much cold damage, and with this setup, so much lightning damage that we just don't have any issues running ailment maps. I could run a 150 ailment map, and everything will be freezing and exploding. No issues. We're dealing so much cold damage and so much lightning damage just with Ice Shot alone, not even factoring in our Heralds, that I found Ice Shot to be a just much more consistent procer of the Heralds, and the Heralds are a big source of our clear speed, particularly Herald of Ice, and Ice Shot inherently does a ton of cold damage that Herald of Ice never has any issues proccing with Ice Shot, at least from my experience with it, and because it has no issues proccing Herald of Ice, it's just a smoother mapper, in my opinion, because when you're running hundreds of maps, you don't want to have a map you put in accidentally brick your build, or you're spending a bunch of currency, and then you're like, you know, your setup isn't able to clear it because of one map modifier. And so being able to just run whatever, literally anything, is really great with Ice Shot. That's not to say that we couldn't remedy that on Lightning Arrow. I think the biggest thing to remedy on Lightning Arrow would be finding a cold against the darkness, because I was using a lightning against the darkness on Lightning Arrow. Getting a cold one, I think, would have definitely solved some of those issues. But for me, this is just the against the darkness that I have. So making that adjustment, I do think would solve those issues for Lightning Arrow. But personally, just between the two, I currently like Ice Shot on our setup more, because just the consistent clear and the ability to run basically any map modifiers with it. Guys, that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I will catch y'all in the next one. If you have any questions with the build, or you're having any issues with your current setup, we have been doing build helps on stream at twitch.tv/Moxsy. If you want to like link me your gear, we've been looking at people's bows, quivers. People are like, oh, I don't have enough survivability, or what should I upgrade next? We're trying to do all of that over on the Twitch channel. So if you are having any issues with your build, or you just want to come hang out and chat some Path of Exile, maybe talk about life, we're over there, twitch.tv/Moxsy. I'll catch y'all on the next one, guys. Take care. Peace.